Elena is respected and admired not just for her intellect and record of achievement, but also for her temperament, her openness to a broad array of viewpoints, her habit, to borrow a phrase from Justice Stevens, of understanding before disagreeing, her fair-mindedness and skill as a consensus builder.
If you ask her supporters, one of Elena Kagan's greatest assets as a nominee to serve on the Supreme Court is her unique ability to both listen to and to appeal to conservatives, even though she is not considered herself to be a conservative. Elena Kagan, according to the prevailing common wisdom, is the kind of nominee who will be able to build unexpected coalitions on the Supreme Court through her openness, her balance, and her estimable powers of persuasion. Track record check. Well, acting as the government's lawyer, Elena Kagan has appeared before the Supreme Court a total of 6 times. There's audio tape of each of those appearances. So check it out. Here's what happened when Elena Kagan argued the government's case in Citizens United versus Federal Election Commission last year. Spoiler alert here, she lost the case. You might remember it's the one that gave corporations the right to spend limitlessly in U.S. elections. But check out this brief back and forth.
It seems, to your shareholder protection rationale, isn't it extraordinarily paternalistic for the government to take the position that shareholders are too stupid to keep track of what their corporations are doing and can't sell their shares or object in the corporate context if they don't like it?
I don't think so, Mr. Chief Justice. I mean, I, for one, can't keep track of what my, where I hold
well, you have a busy job. You can't expect everybody to do that.
It's not that I have a busy job.
But it is extraordinary. I mean, the idea, and as I understand the rationale, is we, the government, Big Brother, has to protect shareholders from themselves. They might give money, they might buy shares in a corporation, and they don't know that the corporation is taking out radio ads. The government has to keep an eye on their interests.
I appreciate that. It's not that I have a busy job. It's that I, like most Americans, own shares through mutual funds. You don't know where your mutual funds are investing, so you don't know where you are.
So it is. I mean, I understand. So it is a paternalistic interest. We, the government, have to protect you naive shareholders.
If you didn't know who the 2 people speaking were in that clip, do you think you could tell who was the lawyer and who was the judge? Of course, the male voice is Chief Justice John Roberts. The female voice is the United States Solicitor General Elena Kagan, the nominee to be the next Supreme Court justice. She was acting then in her capacity as the government's lawyer. But what you just heard, that exchange with Chief Justice Roberts, is not just an example of the vague kind of situation in which Elena Kagan would need to be persuasive as a Supreme Court justice. That was the actual guy she would be trying to persuade every day for the rest of her life in this job. And the funny thing is, Chief Justice Roberts didn't necessarily sound all that persuaded in that back and forth. To the extent that the court matters in terms of what American policy is, the leaders on the court matter in terms of defining what American policy is. It's not just the Chief Justice. It's the center of gravity on the court. Who affects it? Who's getting their way among those 9 justices? Based on the evidence that exists, it is maybe worth being all rational and fact-based about it and wondering if the common wisdom that Solicitor General Elena Kagan would be a great consensus builder might be based on a foundation that's a little thin. Joining us now is Dahlia Lithwick, senior editor and legal correspondent for Slate.com. Dahlia, thanks very much for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
What does Elena Kagan's time arguing in front of the Supreme Court as Solicitor General tell us about what she'd be like as a judge?
I think it tells us exactly what Obama told us today when he introduced her, Rachel, which is this is a common person. Listen to her talking about her confusion with her mutual fund. You know, Ted Olson doesn't confess to having confusion about how his investments go. So she's just a regular person. You know, she's as confused as the rest of us. It also, I think, goes to the point that you made, which is it's never clear, watching Chief Justice John Roberts, that he's ever quite gotten over his days as one of the most adept oral advocates in the country. You still often get the sense, and that clip really captured it, that he'd just as soon, vault the bench and push the person from behind the lectern and argue the case himself. She's very different. If you heard anything there, it's something that sounds like judicial temperament. I mean, she couldn't really get a word in edgewise, but there's this attempt to say, no, it's not this, it's not this, it's somewhere in the middle. Let me help you reframe this. I mean, this is classic Kagan, and this is the thing I think Obama was trying to say would be a real asset at the court, that she'd be able to say, no, 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 far right-wing justices, you're misapprehending the situation. Let me tweak it a little and make it more palatable to you. And I think the other thing you may have heard is, I don't think that John Roberts looked all that persuaded, and the real question that I have is whether this strategy or this thought that maybe she has some weird Svengali-like influence over, the conservative jurists on the court doesn't really miss the sense that I think that we have four pretty locked in, very strong, very, very, coherent ideological views on the right. I don't see them all that open to persuasion.
In terms of the overall style with which justices conduct themselves during oral arguments, one of the things that you've pointed out that I think is very interesting to those of us who haven't been in there and seen the justices in action is the prospect that justices are actually more stylistically aggressive with lawyers who they have more respect for. They're willing to interject more, to be more interrupting with attorneys who they actually feel like do have a great command of the law. Is it possible that that explains some of the real thorny back and forth that we've seen?
Certainly it could, and let's be really careful to say we're talking N equals 6. We're talking 6 oral arguments before the court, and I think it's really not wise to jump to big conclusions, especially since that first Citizens United argument was her first argument ever. So she's learning on the job, and it's clear, I think, that the justices are very comfortable with her. She is, as you heard, very conversational, very collegial with them. So I think there is at least some sense that, look, they respect her. You can hear it in Scalia. He tweaks her sometimes at argument. There's a sort of collegial teasing going on. But as I said, I don't know that that goes to this larger question of whether she's having a huge influence over them on the jurisprudential front. And, it all comes down to Anthony Kennedy at the center there. And I think the suggestion that she's going to have the ability to really shape and change Kennedy's mind the way John Paul Stevens did, I think, again, is a bit of an overstatement of a very complicated relationship between Stevens and Kennedy.
One last brief question for you, Dahlia. One thing that Glenn raised earlier when I was speaking with him is the controversy over Elena Kagan's hiring practices at Harvard. 32 tenure-track hires, I'm told, 25 white men, 6 white women, 1 Asian American woman. A very undiverse hiring record for somebody who's being sort of billed as a closet progressive. Does that play into her conformability? Does that arise as a major political issue for her confirmation?
Oh, I think the White House it's their dream that this will arise, that she'll get to say, what? So I'm not for flagrant application of labels and affirmative action. I think that they would love to have this arise as an issue. I don't suspect it's going to be a major issue. I think it is something that came up over the course of last week and has raised some eyebrows. But my sense is the big theme here is going to be her lack of judicial experience and what that means. I think this is a little bit of a footnote.
Dahlia Lithwick, senior editor and legal correspondent for Slate.com. Thanks for joining us tonight. I have a feeling we'll be having a few more of these conversations.
Thanks, Rachel.